Hello, welcome to the turret of pleasure here in the enchanted kingdom of Hermione. I'm your host, Zipp Gunn. I'm the Lord Chamberlain of the Enchanted Kingdom, and I'm reminiscing about my musical journey through life in a series of videos that might help explain the way I view certain things, the reasons I don't like Grand Funk Railroad, for example. Or Chicago anymore. And so I've been doing these in segments. They were at first very easy. Beatles, Stones, Who. Then I discovered the horn bands, Chicago. I heard jazz. Then I discovered prog rock. And as a sort of an adjunct, I discovered fusion music. And I was quite happy being in my little fusion world into the mid-70s. But, of course, there were lots of things that I missed that I sort of caught up later, maybe. But there was a lot of stuff. For example, the Velvet Underground was a band that never made any impact on anybody in my universe, until about 1972, when my old buddy and schoolmate and neighbor, Simon Hopper, he had the first two Velvet Underground records. And he didn't really like them. And I forget whether we traded something for it, I don't know what. So there I was with my original Canadian pressing with the banana sticker on it of the first album, and a black Verve label polygram mid-70s copy of White Heat, White Light, which makes you wonder if they sold enough to warrant a second pressing, but there you go. And I was fascinated by these records because they were horrible, but they were also kind of really neat at the same time. Now, being a prog rock fusion kind of guy in my 16th or so year, the Velvets were crude and they couldn't play, and there was this. But Sister Ray, it doesn't matter what kind of music you like. Sister Ray is a gigantic achievement. And when you listen to it enough times, I Heard Her Call My Name is another one of those ones where you just go, how can you not think this is great? But it took a while. And it was partly because I never heard it on the radio. Never once did I hear the Velvet Underground on the radio as a kid. I had only heard about them from reputation. And so when the records kind of were dropped in my lap, I decided I would keep them just because they were the kind of records, and there's been a few of these in my life. I thought, at some point I'm going to like these. At some point these are going to really resonate with me. And there's not a lot of records that fit this bill. The classic one for me is Pere Ubu's Dub Housing, which I completely didn't understand. So we're basically in about 1976. And there's stuff happening and sort of surfacing. There's people like Iggy Pop is back in the news. I'd never really paid much attention to Iggy Pop with the Stooges because, again, they never got played on the radio, and I hadn't been fortunate enough to source a copy of either of their records. The Columbia record came out, Raw Power. I thought it didn't sound so great because I kind of expect decent recording quality in a record now that I'm in my teens. And I thought it didn't blow me out of the water. And so I missed Iggy initially. And I was too busy being, into prog and into sort of jazz fusion. But in about 1976-ish, there became, of course, as we all know, this punk rock movement. And there was this whole breath of fresh air, all these fuck Pink Floyd kind of things. Pink Floyd, of course, was always a favorite band of mine. They were never really, I'd liked them since their first album. But by 1976, I was thoroughly tired of Pink Floyd. They'd slowed down to a crawl. Nothing they did rocked very hard, which kind of bugged me. And the lyrics started to get whinier. So when punk rock came along, I was ready. But the problem was, when it came along, it was lousy. And by lousy, I mean where I sat at the time was a whole lot of really poorly recorded, slovenly played rock and roll music was being performed by people who not only couldn't really do it, they didn't give a fuck if they could or not. It was all about their attitude. And I resisted because there was nothing in the initial batch of what I heard. And I'm trying to remember like I heard a lot of stuff that wasn't really punk rock. It was called punk rock. And I remember hearing bands like, there was a lot of Canadian bands in the early days. And they were, tinny sounding, not very good. But the song that perked my ears up, and this will make a lot of people laugh. It makes me laugh. Because I was a bit of a technonoid, recording quality, whatever. I think it was Richard's Records. God, I hope so. And they were playing this punk rock record that wasn't really doing much for me. Up to the point of the moment. And then there was this moment where I suddenly went, whoa, wait a minute. And the moment in question is in the song Cheat. And the moment is where, I think it's Mickey Foot, the producer, I hope it was, decides he's going to flange the whole mix. And I am a sucker for a good flange. When Ichigo Park came out on the radio in 1967, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And to this day, I'm a sucker for a good flange. A real all-encompassing, And that's the one you get in Cheat. And I instantly went, hold it a sec, who is this? And Ian Cochran, my buddy and erstwhile partner, briefly, he says, it's the Clash. And it was the Clash's first record, the green one, which Columbia Records of Canada quite sensibly put out when it first came out, because they thought, who knows, maybe we'll sell one. So it was out in Canada, I think the same time it was out in Britain. Didn't come out in America forever. And the green one is the one without all the hit singles tacked onto it. So it's sort of the more pure one. And I remember thinking, that's okay. And then I got into the record and I thought, this kicks ass. And I kind of liked it. And so it was hard to find. And right about, not too soon afterwards anyways, their second album came out, Give 'Em Enough Rope comes out. And it was, in those days, the big record stores would put a new title out. If it wasn't a super hot title, but it was new and they wanted to put some buzz behind it, they put it out for $3.99. Pretty good price. And lo and behold, there it is. The Clash says, you know what, for $3.99, I'll give it a shot. And of course, it's a weird record to get your first Clash fix on. But I really liked Safe European Home. I liked all the Young Punks. First song on the second side, what the fuck is it called? At any rate, I liked it. It didn't sound as nasty as I thought punk rock should sound. But of course, as we all know, that's more Sandy Pearlman's doing. But I liked it. It was a good ride. I liked the sentiment behind it. It kicked ass, and that's sort of where I got into punk rock. And at almost exactly the same time, you could get the Sex Pistols album for $3.99. I bought that and realized, okay, this is how it should be recorded, first of all. And again, the attitude on that record is just everything, really. So I was in like Flynn, and then, of course, as a lot of you probably remember, suddenly everything was everywhere. So, you Buzzcock singles going steady, $3.99. Sure, I'll buy that. Like a million different bands. And they all came out on Canadian pressing. UK Subs came out on RCA. Um, and some of them were better than others. Eater weren't that good, but they were fun. And of course, that was the whole thing. And then stuff like the Stiff Records phenomenon started happening. And Stiff was a real interesting thing because they were very punk rock in ethic, but their music wasn't necessarily always punk rock. There was some punk rock, and of course they did the first Motorhead records, and I mean they did a little bit of everything. Here he comes, Minister, the Prime Minister, the Emperor is here. He's going to come and regale us with some songs of his people, I think. Mm-hmm. And so I got into punk rock, and the more I got into it, the more I realized that it was, and with me, lyrics are always secondary. It's, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And so once I started discovering the lyrics, I started to go, okay, finally, these lyrics are better than, Elias of Sunhillow. They mean more to me. Yeah, come on. Emergency conference with the Emperor. What do you think? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know. Oh, the Emperor's been on a tour of the Imperial Kingdom. He's telling me that there are things that need to be addressed. Yeah. So also punk rock was funny though because I grew up with um, a group of people in late high school, early adulthood years, who were more into the radio rock, Fleetwood Mac, playing in cover bands. Uh, what I guess you might say was the sort of the corporate rock system, if you will. And I was had one foot in that and one foot in the kind of punk rock thing. And so, but my inroads into working in music um, came mainly through punk rock, mainly because I could tolerate it. And I became the guy in our local scene who would record your crazy punk rock band, no matter how good or bad they were, and it would be really cheap, and it would be okay. You could actually listen to it, and you didn't have to, we would set it up, you would record into it, I would mix it. Sometimes I would take it to the place. I didn't do that for long because it was a Porta Studio in name only, 8-track reel-to-reel Porta Studio I bought. But punk rock was a very liberating force for me because all the years I was into um, prog rock, fusion, and stuff, the audience and the performer don't really ever interact on any kind of personal level. You go to their concerts, you buy their product, they, you know. Whereas punk rock, the band would come and sleep in your spare room. And so when I discovered bands like Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys, who were West Coast American hardcore bands, who I really admired, um, I got into the network of people that liked them. And the next thing you knew, these people were staying at my house when they were in town because they had a place where they could stay in between gigs. Because back in those days in punk rock, that's sort of how you did it. And it was a much better way of connecting with your audience and with your idols, if you will. And so I've always felt my deepest kinship with the punk rock scene, even though I listen to a lot of things. But the whole punk rock thing was the big eye opener for everybody, not just me, but the corporate rock world soon got in and helped create their own sort of palatable form of punk rock, which they continue to sell quite fruitfully to this day. Punk rock still exists almost everywhere in its sort of purest form, where people go out to little concerts and little bars and basements and whatnot. And so that's really cool. And it's now a real social force, whereas first it was just almost a subgenre of pop music. Now it's almost turned into this way of life to a lot of people, and it's interesting because I kind of share that. So it remains at the fore of my sort of musical taste, if you will. I hear more good stuff that I would call punk rock nowadays than I hear a lot of other styles. So a lot of styles of music, they come and they go. For strengths, punk rock is no exception. Its glory days were in the late 70s, early 80s, and it morphed into a lot of different things. Bands like Killing Joke, post-punk, if you will, still aggressive, but more kind of orchestral. Or bands like Blind Idiot God, orchestral hardcore with every fourth song being a dub instrumental. So you get all these cross fertilizations. So that one goes, punk basically goes to today. So this one is going to continue. There's going to be more editions because I still haven't even started on certain things, because by 1977 I hadn't discovered anything in the world of classical music. And in that area, that will be my next one, is suddenly I discovered classical music and the weird way I discovered it and how I really got into it and remain really into it. But that'll be next time. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. The Emperor and I are going to go into chambers and discuss what needs to be done. I suspect feeding is one. And we'll talk at you later. Don't forget to look after each other. And we'll talk to you soon.